there is no military solution to this war. It has to end through negotiation. And there's only one leader in the world that's capable of bringing the two sides to a table.
As Trump is pushing for peace, the Russians are killing more and more Ukrainian civilians and going after more Ukrainian infrastructure.
So we are skeptical because as of right now, we haven't seen any single fact that would support that Russia is ready for the peace.
Every night, every single day, it carries out the most cynical strikes.
Putin, well, to me, he's just biding his time, waiting for more opportune time to attack Ukraine.
Welcome to the day. Fresh talks aimed at reaching a ceasefire in Russia's invasion of Ukraine are underway in Saudi Arabia. US and Russian representatives have met in Riyadh. The Kremlin says it shares the US view that the war needs to end, but says there are many what it calls nuances to be worked out. Despite the talks, Russia and Ukraine have continued to trade drone and missile strikes. Ukrainian officials said a missile attack on Sumy in northeastern Ukraine wounded 65 people, including more than a dozen children. Ukrainian President Vlodymyr Zelenskyy said his country remains open to a ceasefire, but that these efforts are being blocked by Russia.
No matter what we're discussing with our partners right now, Putin must be pushed to issue a real order to stop the strikes, because the one who brought this war must be the one to take it back.
Matthias Schranner is a negotiations expert who's advised the UN, global corporations and political parties on dispute resolution. He joins us from Dubai. Welcome to the day. These are mediated talks, with each side speaking separately to the United States. Could you give us an insight into what happens inside the room, especially when each side has made its position so clear so publicly?
Well, making a statement about a position, this is the starting point of every negotiation. It's important that we need to read between the lines, not only the lines. So what we do here, or what the Americans, what they do, they try to come up with different proposals. It's called shuttle diplomacy. So they go with a proposal to the first party and then to the second party, and they try to find some room between the lines. Because at this phase of a negotiation, we need to find a new way, a new approach. We need more creativity, because if we focus on the positions, we will never reach an agreement.
OK, so the previous negotiation with Ukraine, they came to a deal whereby Ukraine said, yes, we're looking for a full ceasefire. This gets handed to Russia. Russia turns around and says, yes, we like the idea of a ceasefire, but we have certain conditions, we have certain nuances. This is a known Russian tactic of just continuing to say the same thing and same thing until the other side moves. So, given that, how do you move the Russians?
Well, the best way to avoid an agreement is to come up with new demands, to come up with new requests, because all these requests are they are irrational. They won't work. So how to get them to move from their position? It's a power struggle. It's all about power. The question is, what power signals could the Americans send to make them move?
So what power signals could the Americans send to make their move, given that we know Donald Trump is very reluctant to put US troops' boots on the ground in Ukraine?
This might be one of the power signals to send American troops or European troops. It could be a military signal, or it could be a political signal, like increasing the sanctions for Russia. However, Mr. Trump, he needs to do something, because he told the world, I'm very hard on Mr. Putin, and I will come up with a solution within 24 hours, which we know doesn't work. However, he is in a very difficult situation now, Mr. Trump, because he said, I'm the one, I will get this done. I will reach an agreement. I will reach a ceasefire agreement. And what we see now, he's far away from an agreement. So he needs to do something. He needs to come up with consequences like sanctions or military operations.
So that's what happens after or outside the room. But while you're in the room, Given that it took Vladimir Putin just hours to break his promise to Donald Trump to stop attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, how does the US, as mediator, approach talks with an interlocutor who appears to act in such bad faith?
Well, this is a misunderstanding. The American party, they say they are mediators. However, they are not mediators, they are negotiation party. So as a mediator, you're neutral. You come up with neutral positions, you come up with neutral proposals, and you try to find a way between the lines. America is, from my perspective, not a mediator. They are a negotiation partner because they have their own interest, and they're using power in this negotiation process. So it's not a shuttle diplomacy. This is what they tell us. However, it's not a shuttle diplomacy. It's a real tough, ongoing negotiation process.
OK. Starting from where we are, how would you approach these talks with Russia?
Mr. Witkoff, he traveled to Moscow. He had the first discussion with Mr. Putin. So what we know, it's all about Mr. Putin. So he will make all the decisions. The biggest problem here is that Mr. Putin is in a bubble. He trusts only a few ministers in his government, and he's not allowing other perspectives in his way of making decisions. So what I have heard in my community, and right now I'm in the Middle East, I'm talking to a lot of diplomats, I'm talking to a lot of experts here. They are telling me we are negotiating here with the wrong people, because these negotiation guys, they are not from the inner circle from Putin. They don't have access to Putin. They report to someone else, meaning they don't have a mandate to negotiate. So we are negotiating with the wrong negotiation partners here, and this is why we are far away from an agreement. So the best way, before you start a formal, a visible negotiation, you need to negotiate in the background. You need to find a way to test options before you start this formal and visible negotiation. Because if you start a visible negotiation, like right now in Saudi Arabia, then someone will lose his or her face. And this is why it's very critical. And from my perspective, it was a huge mistake for Mr. Trump to set up this negotiation in Saudi Arabia, because from my perspective, Mr. Trump will lose his face.
OK. So, but you say that the people there say we're negotiating with the wrong people, but isn't that obvious to everyone? Isn't that just Putin's way? I will send these low-level diplomats where Ukraine sent the defense minister. I will send minions to negotiate on my behalf. They come back to me. I say, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough. And we just sit there until I get what I want. We all know this.
Exactly. This is the usual negotiation tactic of Mr. Putin, sending low-level negotiation partners, and they are not diplomats. They are not in this community. They don't have the network. They don't have the relationship which we need to reach an agreement here. So we are talking to the wrong people here. And of course, Mr. Putin will always say, okay, this is not enough. It's not acceptable. And this is why he's playing up on time. And the best way to avoid an agreement is to come up with new demands. And this is what he's doing. And he's always talking about his willingness, about we need to find a solution for a long-term peace agreement. On the other side, his actions are completely different. And, in a negotiation, actions speak louder than words. We shouldn't listen to the words of Mr. Putin. We should look at the actions. And right. From an action perspective, it's crystal clear. Mr. Putin doesn't want an agreement here.
So given that, it does sound like, as far as you're concerned, these talks in Saudi Arabia are pointless.
Definitely. More than that, they are dangerous because there's no way back. And Mr. Trump said, this is the next step for reaching an agreement. But, talking about all these little stuff right now, it's a waste of time. And, Mr. Putin, the American delegation, they will lose their face because what's the next step? What's coming next? And this is why it was from my perspective, from a negotiation perspective, it was definitely the wrong decision to set up this meeting, this negotiation process right now in Saudi Arabia.
OK, thank you so much for talking us through that. Matthias Schranner from the Schranner Negotiation Institute. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, let's pick this up with Jonathan Katz. He's a senior director for the Anti-Corruption, Democracy and Security Project at the Brookings Institution. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. Are you optimistic that these talks in Saudi Arabia will bring a ceasefire in Ukraine?
I have been optimistic about these talks. There's been earlier ceasefire and other negotiations between Ukraine and Russia that have not led to Russia pulling back from its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And, Russia right now believes, and Mr. Putin believes, that he has the upper hand because he has an American president now that is echoing his same talking points. So I think while there could be a ceasefire, one that could be in the Black Sea, they're talking about the Black Sea grain corridor, that's quite possible. What you've seen over the last couple of days, as Mr. Zelenskyy pointed out, was that there was a plan on March 11th that both Mr. Putin and Zelenskyy said in certain terms that they agreed to. But since then, Russia has continued to attack Ukrainian civilians in a way that shows that he's not serious about an agreement. We all want to see peace. We'd like to see Ukraine have the type of security that it needs to thrive. But right now, the obstacle is in Moscow. And unfortunately, I think the obstacle is also in Washington. As they echo the talking points of Mr. Putin, it makes you feel like they're not really a neutral arbiter in this process.
So what do you think is going on? Do you think that the Trump administration has effectively sided with Russia, or have they just misjudged the scale of this problem?
Can I say, I think I agree with you on both points. On one hand, I think Mr. Trump said that he would solve this issue in one day. And obviously, a full-scale invasion that has taken place in Ukraine, the type of devastation that has happened, the security risk both for the United States and Europe still remain grave, given the threats posed by Russia. So on one hand, certainly this administration that has come in, that is doing all sorts of things domestically, but also has weakened the U.S. national security infrastructure, is having a very difficult time, as you can see, both in the Middle East, but also here between Russia and Ukraine at solving these very difficult issues. The other part of this is that when you hear the lead negotiator, Mr. Witkoff, parroting or actually echoing the talking points of the Kremlin, you have to wonder about the position of the United States. Now, we've seen over the last several weeks where the president of the United States has belittled President Zelenskyy in the White House. They cut off assistance to the Ukrainians, including military assistance. They cut off intelligence as well. And so you have to wonder, these are all things that Mr. Putin and those in Moscow are cheering on every day. But when you hear Witkoff and others speak publicly, including earlier this week, over the weekend, about what is taking place in Ukraine, as if they didn't, as if Mr. Putin didn't start this war, as if Mr. Putin wasn't a war criminal sought after by the International Criminal Court, and Ukrainian children stolen, women raped, and cities bombed, you would think that it's a very different picture from the United States than the one presented recently under President Biden. It's the absolute opposite.
Just bearing in mind that, of course, Vladimir Putin wanted on those charges, not convicted yet. And in this conflict, as in Gaza, what thought do you think has been given to the day after? What thought has the US given to enforcing any ceasefire that might come out of these talks?
So the U.S., if there is a ceasefire, absolutely has to be an integral partner at sort of maintaining any type of ceasefire. But ceasefires alone are just a step towards potential resolution of this conflict, and that conflict and the resolution require the United States to play a major role, including on the security side, which Ukraine absolutely needs, given that it cannot trust that Moscow will respect any deal. So the United States plays a crucial role in any type of ceasefire going forward. And for this administration not to, and they're already saying that the U.S. will not be backing up in any significant way any type of peace deal in the end is really problematic. The U.S. must be there as one of the guarantors of security. We know that Europe and European leaders are thinking about this, offering troops, talking about how they can play a role if there is something that moves beyond just a ceasefire to some type of longstanding agreement. It is incredibly complicated to pull this off, but it's really important that the United States be there.
Thank you for that. Jonathan Katz from the Brookings Institution. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Kira Rudik is a member of the Ukrainian parliament and leads the Holos political party. She joins us from Kyiv. Welcome back to DW. Do you expect these talks will lead to a ceasefire?
Hello, Phil, and thank you so much for having me. Well, we are skeptical here on the ground in Kyiv because when we first heard the talks about the ceasefire, it was the day of one of the major attacks on Kyiv, when explosion happened like almost everywhere in every part of the city. And right now, these talks continue when just last night, Russia had attacked the city of Sumy, the school in the city where we have at least 30 people injured, and the amount keeps increasing. So we are skeptical because as of right now, we haven't seen any single fact that would support that Russia is ready for the peace, right? And if they were anywhere ready, they would accept the unconditional ceasefire that was proposed by President Trump and that President Zelenskyy accepted. So we support the diplomatic efforts, but honestly, we remain skeptical about the results it can bring.
We heard just then President Zelenskyy talking about pressure needing to be brought to bear on Russia. What pressure would you like to see applied to Russia? By whom?
Well, we have seen how President Trump and his administration was able to apply pressure on Ukraine to bring us to the table of negotiations. They pulled out the military aid and intelligence that was desperately needed for us to keep defending ourselves. So we believe, talking with the President Trump's words, that he is supposed to have some cards on the table for him to bring Russia to the table and then have them comply with the agreements there will be. That could be the real sanctions that would work and not show the visibility of the work. That could be the pressure on the international arena using countries like India and perhaps China. That could be the limitations on the so-called shadow fleet that Russia is using to keep exporting their resources. Right. So I believe right now there is like a list of things that can be done to make it very painful for Russia if they will not go ahead with the peace negotiations.
On the idea of a full ceasefire, we heard Vlodymyr Zelenskyy repeatedly blame Russia for rejecting these proposals. Back in August 2022, it was President Zelenskyy who rejected the idea of a ceasefire, saying it would only freeze the conflict. So is it only American pressure that has changed his mind?
You see, Phil, we have been in so-called ceasefire agreement with Russia since 2014. And where it led us is to the frozen conflict that allowed Russia to accumulate forces and then launch a full-scale invasion. So we have learned this lesson a very hard and painful way, and we paid an ultimate price that the ceasefire without bigger strategy would just mean that Russia will be able to strengthen themselves. So right now, it is, yes, the pressure from the White House, because we have been constantly saying, learn from our lessons, but also I think its ability to throw the ball into Russia's court.
Okay.
So we are ready for a ceasefire. We know that the keys are at Russia in Kremlin to end the war.
And a quick word about this potential ceasefire in the Black Sea, which might also be on the table to allow the free passage of shipping. How important is that for Ukraine?
Well, if we remember, there was a so-called grain deal in 2022 and 2023 that Russia pulled away from because they didn't like, quote unquote, the countries we were exporting the grains at. So as of right now, we were able to export our grains with our military protecting the ships. So I think Russia needs the ceasefire deal in the Black Sea more than Ukraine does, because we are pretty strong in the Black Sea.
Okay, thanks for talking us through that. Kira Rudik, leader of the political party Holos in the Ukrainian parliament. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and glory to Ukraine.